Our world is literally unsustainable right now, the way it operates. And I mean that in all scales and dimensions. Our incipient macroeconomic recovery from the crisis of last year, the crash of 2008, is very fragile, and it is unsustainable unless we have what we promised we would have but do not yet have, and that is a green recovery, meaning that we recover in a way which directs our efforts, our resources, our investments towards sustainability. We will not even be able to manage a short-term macroeconomic recovery unless we integrate strategies for climate change mitigation and adaptation right into our macroeconomic policies. I'll explain why that is in just a few minutes. We are unsustainable socially. The world fabric is coming apart, not coming together. The gaps of the richest and the poorest are widening. There are, of course, poor countries getting richer. There is no ironclad law that says the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That's not correct. But it is also true that many of the poorest people on this planet are dying of their poverty, and if not dying, struggling to survive and falling further and further behind. So a few years ago, Paul Crutzen coined the neologism, the Anthropocene, as the term for our new age. So what is the Anthropocene? That's a geologic term, meaning our new geologic epoch. If you ask a geologist right now, other than one steeped in Crutzian terminology, what epoch we are in, they'll say the Holocene. That's the era that followed the Pleistocene, the Ice Age era. Now we're in the Holocene, the post-Ice Age, post-glaciation. And that's been for about 11,000 years. But Crutzen says, no, we've passed the Holocene. We're now in the Anthropocene. What is that? Of course, anthropos from the Greek means human, and scene means epoch. So he says we're in the human-made epoch of the planet. What does he mean by that? He means that we're in the age of the planet, the geologic age, mind you, where the human activity dominates the Earth's processes. This is an extraordinary concept, that humanity has become so large in absolute number and in average economic activity for each of us that we have overtaken the physical Earth processes in vital ways, to the point of threatening the stratospheric ozone level, to the point of changing the climate, to the point of fundamentally changing the hydrologic cycle, and so forth. Now, you could regard that as a metaphor, the Anthropocene, that's a metaphor or almost a poetic expression to say that humans are having a lot of influence on the Earth physical processes. But interestingly, the American Geologic Society took seriously this idea and tested by the standards of geology whether we have indeed entered a new geologic era. There are many standards used to analyze paleoclimates or paleogeology to say when did an old era stop, when did a new one begin. For instance, sediment patterns on the planet or climate patterns and so on. And they came to the conclusion that Crutzen was not just speaking in metaphors, but speaking in rigorous geologic terminology. We've entered a new era where Earth processes have fundamentally changed. How can we be unsustainable today, pushing for a massive increase of output, which we do and want, and which is going to occur, by the way, whether we want it or not, because countries will achieve economic growth? How can we possibly achieve sustainability in this way? Well, I think the answer can only come in a couple of ways, and only one of them, in my view, can be the dominant way. Of course, one way is that we hit disaster one way or another, so that the growth doesn't occur. Maybe the rich world collapses, or the poor world stops growing, or we have global crisis, but one way or another, the world's aspirations for major regions are not fulfilled. I don't want my children to be in that world, by the way, because that will be a very dangerous world. Aside from what it will mean for the people involved, that will be a world of conflict. I've not yet seen a president or prime minister in the rich world say, I ran the numbers and I'm campaigning on cutting our living standards by half. Don't count on it, ladies and gentlemen. This will not go smoothly. You may say overconsumption, it's time to conserve. Don't count on it happening smoothly. That has not been the rallying cry in the United States or even the more enlightened European Union on these matters. Everybody wants to grow more. In fact, nobody is campaigning on a pledge, let's stay where we are even, which was the basis of my calculation. The other way is from the famous so-called IPAT equation. I equals P times A times T. I means impact of humans on the environment, P is population, A is the level of economic activity, and T is a measure of technology. And the famous equation said that our human impact is equal to our population times the output per capita times a measure of our technological burden on the physical environment. And if you take that view and you say, yes, we want A to go up, that is the per person level of economic activity, the only ways to do that with a lower impact are either to slow the population growth rate and maybe gradually have it come down, but not in a disastrous way, because that would also violate what we're trying to accomplish, or a change fundamentally of our technological systems. So I would recommend two things. I'm going to only mention one quickly, and then I'm going to come to the second one. One thing I would recommend is that we redouble our efforts to stabilize the human population. I believe every country should take the responsibility where populations are growing quickly to bring them under control through voluntary reductions of fertility. Africa cannot go on with total fertility rates of 5 children or 6 children or 7 children per woman in the countryside, which is the levels that now persist in much of rural Africa. These places are bursting by the seams, at the seams. And you know that the UN forecast for sub-Saharan Africa's population is that it will grow from 800 million now to 1.8 billion by 2050, in a place already under profound ecological stress and extreme poverty. I believe that this, if it occurs, cannot be consistent with the kind of economic development we long for in Africa. I believe that Africa's economic development requires leadership to reduce the fertility rates voluntarily and significantly and rapidly. But now let me turn to the T, which is an even bigger and more complex challenge, the technology. It must be the fundamental role and goal of all our policies going forward to have a fundamental technological overhaul for global sustainability. Our current technologies, I hope I've convinced you, are incompatible with our development objectives and our ecological needs. We cannot go on with the internal combustion engine, with the coal-fired power plants, with the way we grow our food and eat our food now. We cannot simply scale this up. The planet will not accept it. we need a fundamental technological overhaul. That requires a new kind of economy and a new kind of economic policy, because markets go some way towards technology change, but only some way. The essence of large-scale technological change is public-private partnerships. We will need a new kind of economic strategy within countries and globally to bring about the scale of technology change that we need in the next 2 to 3 decades to put our planet back onto a sustainable course.